Hello, this is Sneaker's Corner. I'm going to read you a passage from Surah 33, 37 to 40. And at the end, I'm going to ask you, what is the key message in this passage? When you said to him whom God had blessed and you had favoured, keep your wife to yourself and fear God, but you hid within yourself what God was to reveal, and you feared the people, but it was God you were supposed to fear. Then, when Zaid ended his relationship with her, we gave her to you in marriage, that there may be no restriction for believers regarding the wives of their adopted sons when their relationship has ended. The command of God was fulfilled. There is no blame on the prophet regarding what God has ordained for him. Such is the pattern of God among those who passed before. The command of God is an absolute decree. Those who deliver the messages of God and fear him, and never fear anyone except God. God is sufficient as a reckoner. Muhammad is not the father of any of your men, but he is the messenger of God and the seal of the prophets. God is cognizant of everything. So there's your passage. So which part of that did you think was the content of the message? What was the objective?
The Matrix is a system, Neo. That system is our enemy. But when you're inside, you look around, what do you see? Businessmen, teachers, lawyers, carpenters, the very minds of the people we are trying to save. But until we do, these people are still a part of that system, and that makes them our enemy. You have to understand, most of these people are not ready to be unplugged. And many of them are so inert, so hopelessly dependent on the system, that they will fight to protect it. Were you listening to me, Neo? Or were you looking at the woman in the red dress? I was... Look again. Freeze it.
Well, perhaps you thought the objective was to tell you an embarrassing story about how Muhammad ended up marrying his daughter-in-law. Zaid was his adopted son. He fancied his wife, and lo and behold, he ends up marrying her. Zaid divorces her and so on. Is that what you thought it was? Okay. In today's video, we're going to be talking about misdirection, and I believe this is a case of misdirection. Big question for me often is, how does the Quran manage to brainwash people? It's a hard question to answer, but one of the ways in which people are brainwashed is to bypass their reason, their consciousness, and to plant an idea in their subconsciousness. So let's have a look at that again. We have in Surah 33, if we go to verse 4, we have this interesting point here. Nor did he make your wives whom you equate with your mothers, your actual mothers, nor did he make your adopted sons your actual sons. These are your words coming out of your mouths. God speaks the truth and guides to the path. So we can see there, it's even though there's a number of verses between verse 4 and verse 37, this seems to be connected because it's part of the one argument that adopted children are not really your children. Okay. In verse 6, it goes on to say, the prophet is more caring of the believers than they are of themselves, and his wives are mothers to them. And blood relatives are closer to one another in God's book than the believers or the immigrants, though you should do good to your friends. That is inscribed in the book. Recall that we received a pledge from the prophets, and from you, and from Noah and Abraham and Moses and Jesus, son of Mary, we received from them a solemn pledge. Okay, so in verse 6 to 7, it's saying that blood relatives are closer to one another in God's book than the believers or immigrants. Now this, apart from anything else, subverts the Christian message. It's, if we take, for example, Mark chapter 3, verse 31 to 34, it has the complete opposite message. Then Jesus' mother and brothers arrived. Standing outside, they sent someone in to call him. A crowd was sitting around him, and they told him, "Your mother and brothers are outside looking for you." "Who are my mother and my brothers?" he asked. Then he looked at those seated in a circle around him and said, "Here are my mother and my brothers. Whoever does God's will is my brother and sister and mother." Do you see the huge difference there? They're dipole opposites. In Surah 33, the argument is that blood relatives are more important than believers. In Christianity, belief and faith is the number one thing. You're close to God by doing God's will. So that's been subverted. So we can see already that there is an anti-Christian agenda at foot. If we go back to Surah 4, I didn't read the entire verse of Surah 4, so I'm going to read it again, and we'll notice something else. God did not place two hearts inside any man's body, nor did he make your wives, whom you equate with your mothers, your actual mothers, nor did he make you adopted sons, your actual sons. These are your words coming out of your mouths. God speaks the truth and guides to the path. Now this verse seems innocuous enough, but it actually is a double-barreled shotgun against Christianity. Let me explain. Well, what does this first line refer to? God did not place two hearts inside any man's body. Well, Surah 33 gives us a context. Surah 33 is called the Confederates. Who were the Confederates in Muhammad's time? It's the Ghassanids and the Lakhmids. Okay, so the Ghassanids, which were in the western part of northern Arabia, they were monophysites. The Lakhmids were in the east, and they were Nestorians. So, what do the monophysites believe? They believe that there is only one inseparable nature, partially divine, partly and subordinately human, in the person of Christ. Okay, so they believe that the divine and human part of Jesus is all part of one inseparable nature within the person of Christ. Okay. The Nestorian view is that there is two persons, divine and human, in one God. Right? Now, that controversy was raging from the 5th century onwards, particularly into the time of Muhammad's day. The inner nature of Jesus. And the beginning of verse 4 is actually a comment on that controversy. God did not place two hearts inside any man's body. If we take the idea of two natures in one person, which is the Chalcedonian view, the Catholic view of the time, it's taken an axe to that view. If we take the Nestorian idea, which is that there are two persons in one nature, again, it's taken an axe to that and it's contradicting it. Even the monophysites doesn't really survive it either. It's basically saying that all of these views are nonsense. God doesn't have a son. And the idea of there being a divine and human aspect to Jesus is being contradicted by that line. Now, this brings us on to another thing. It's saying that, nor did he make your adopted sons your actual sons. Now, Christians believe that we are the adopted children of God. So this verse, even though it sounds very innocuous, is actually a very strongly worded attack on the core of Christian beliefs. So essentially, this is an anti-Christian text that we're dealing with here. So this is really a case of misdirection. We are distracted by the woman in the red dress, Zaid's wife, but actually there's something much more afoot, which is to plant the idea that there can be no adopted children, so therefore Christians are not in close union with God. So it's a very, very serious matter. But there's more to it.
Do you think it's possible to control someone's attention? Even more than that, what about predicting human behavior? I think those are interesting ideas if you could. I mean, for me, that'd be the perfect superpower. Actually, kind of an evil way of approaching it. But for myself, in the past, I've spent the last 20 years studying human behavior from a rather unorthodox way, picking pockets. When we think of misdirection, we think of something as looking off to the side, when actually it's often the things that are right in front of us that are the hardest things to see, the things that you look at every day that you're blinded to. For example, how many of you still have your cell phones on you right now? Great. Double check, make sure you still have them on you. I was doing some shopping beforehand. Now, you've looked at them probably a few times today, but I'm going to ask you a question about them. Without looking at your cell phone directly yet, can you remember the icon in the bottom right corner? Bring them out, check, and see how accurate you were. How'd you do? Show of hands, did we get it? Now that you're done looking at those, close them down, because every phone has something in common. No matter how you organize the icons, you still have a clock on the front. So without looking at your phone, what time was it? You just looked at your clock, right? It's an interesting idea. Now I'll ask you to take that a step further with a game of trust. Close your eyes. I realize I'm asking you to do that while you just heard there's a pickpocket in the room, but close your eyes. Now, you've been watching me for about 30 seconds. With your eyes closed, what am I wearing? Make your best guess. What color is my shirt? What color is my tie? Now open your eyes. By show of hands, were you right? It's interesting, isn't it? Some of us are a little bit more perceptive than others. It seems that way. But I have a different theory about that model of attention. They have fancy models of attention, Posner's trendy model of attention. For me, I like to think of it very simple, like a surveillance system. It's kind of like you have all these fancy sensories, and inside your brain is a little security guard. For me, I like to call him Frank. So Frank is sitting at a desk. He's got all sorts of cool information in front of him, high-tech equipment. He's got cameras. He's got a little phone that he can pick up, listen to the ears, all these senses, all these perceptions. But attention is what steers your perceptions, is what controls your reality. It's the gateway to the mind. If you don't attend to something, you can't be aware of it. But ironically, you can attend to something without being aware of it. That's why there's the cocktail effect. When you're in a party, you're having conversations with someone, and yet you can recognize your name, and you didn't even realize you were listening to that. Now, for my job, I have to play with techniques to exploit this, to play with your attention as a limited resource. So if I could control how you spend your attention, if I could maybe steal your attention through a distraction. Now, instead of doing it like misdirection and throwing off to the side, instead what I choose to focus on is Frank. To be able to play with the Frank inside your head, your little security guard, and get you, instead of focusing on your external senses, just to go internal for a second. So if I ask you to access a memory, like, what is that? What just happened? Do you have a wallet? Do you have an American Express in your wallet? And when I do that, your Frank turns around. He accesses the file. He has to rewind the tape. And what's interesting is he can't rewind the tape at the same time that he's trying to process new data. Now, I mean, this sounds like a good theory, but I could talk for a long time and tell you lots of things, and they may be true, a portion of them. But I think it's better if I try to show that to you here live. So if I come down, I'm going to do a little bit of shopping. Just hold still where you are. Hello, how are you? It's lovely to see you. You did a wonderful job on stage. You have a lovely watch that doesn't come off very well. Do you have your ring as well? Good, just taking inventory. You're like a buffet. It's hard to tell where to start. There's so many great things. Hi, how are you? Good to see you. Hi, sir, could you stand up for me, please? just right where you are. You're married, you follow the directions well. That's nice to meet you, sir. You don't have a whole lot inside your pockets. Anything down by the pocket over here? Hopefully so. Have a seat. There you go. You're doing well. Hi, sir. How are you? Good to see you, sir. You have a ring, a watch. Do you have a wallet on you? I don't. Well, we'll find one for you. Come on up this way, Joe. Give Joe a round of applause. Come on up, Joe. Let's play a game. Pardon me. Don't think that you need this clicker anymore. You can have that. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Come on up to the stage, Joe. Let's play a little game. Now, do you have anything in your front pockets? Money. All right, let's try that. Can you stand right over this way for me? Turn around and let's see. If I give you something that belongs to me, this is just something, a half poker chip. Hold out your hand for me. Watch it kind of close. Now, this is a task for you to focus on. Now, you have your money in your front pocket here? Yep. Good. I'm not going to actually put my hand in your pocket. I'm not ready for that kind of commitment. One time a guy had a hole in his pocket, and that was rather traumatizing. I was looking for his wallet, and he gave me his phone number. It was a big miscommunication. So let's do this simply. Squeeze your hand. Squeeze it tight. Do you feel the poker chip in your hand? I do. Would you be surprised if I could take it out of your hand? Say yes? Very. Good. Open your hand. Thank you very much. I'll cheat if you give me a chance. Make it harder for me. Just use your hand. Grab my wrist, but squeeze. Squeeze firm. Did you see it go? No. No, it's not here. Open your hand. See, while we're focused on the hand, it's sitting on your shoulder right now. Go ahead and take it off. Now, let's try that again. Hold your hand out flat. Open it up all the way. Put your hand up a little bit higher, but watch it close there, Joe. See, if I did it slowly, it'd be back on your shoulder. Joe, we're going to keep doing this till you catch it. You're going to get it eventually. I have faith in you. Squeeze firm. Squeeze. You're human. You're not slow. It's back on your shoulder. You were focused on your hand. That's why you were distracted. While you were watching this, I couldn't quite get your watch off. It was difficult. Yeah. Yet you had something inside your front pocket. Do you remember what it was?
Money.
Check your pocket. See if it's still there. Is it still there? Oh, that's where it was. Go ahead and put it away. We're just shopping. This trick's more about the timing, really. I'm going to try to push it inside your hand. Put your other hand on top for me, would you? It's amazingly obvious now, isn't it? It looks a lot like the watch I was wearing, doesn't it?
That's pretty good. That's pretty good.
Oh, thanks. But it's only a start. Let's try it again a little bit differently. Hold your hands together. Put your other hand on top. Now, if you're watching this little token, this obviously has become a little target. It's like a red herring. If we watch this kind of close, it looks like it goes away. It's not back on your shoulder. It falls out of the air, lands right back in the hand. Did you see it go? It's funny. Got a little guy, he's union. He works up there all day. If I did slowly, if it goes straight away, it lands down by your pocket. I believe, is it in this pocket, sir? No, don't reach in your pocket. That's a different show. Sorry, that's rather strange. They have shots for that. Can I show them what that is? That's rather bizarre. Is this yours, sir? I have no idea how that works. We'll just send that over there. That's great. I need help with this one. Step over this way for me. Now, don't run away. You had something down by your pants pocket. I was checking mine. I couldn't find everything. But I noticed you had something here. Feel the outside of your pocket for a moment. Down here, I noticed this. Is this something of yours, sir? Is this? I had no idea. That's a shrimp.
Yeah, saving it for later.
You've entertained all these people in a wonderful way. Better than you know. So we'd love to give you this lovely watch as a gift. Hopefully it matches his taste. But also we have a couple of other things. A little bit of cash.
Yep.
And then we have a few other things. These all belong to you, along with a big round of applause from all your friends. Joe, thank you very much. So, same question I asked you before, but this time you don't have to close your eyes. What am I wearing? Attention is a powerful thing. Like I said, it shapes your reality. So I guess I'd like to pose that question to you. If you could control somebody's attention, what would you do with it? Thank you.
To lead us into that, I'm going to read from Robert Spencer's book, Did Muhammad Exist? On several occasions, Allah seemed anxious to grant his prophet his heart's desires, as in the notorious story of one of Muhammad's wives, Zaynab bint Jahsh. Noted for her striking beauty, Zaynab was originally married to Muhammad's adopted son, Zaid bin Muhammad, formerly known as Zaid bin Haritha, who was so close to the Prophet that he was known as the beloved of the Messenger of Allah. Zaid has the distinction of being the only contemporary of Muhammad, or purported contemporary, to be mentioned by name in the Quran. One day Muhammad chanced to visit Zaid's home while his adopted son was away, and Zaynab answered the door in a state of semi-undress. He looked at her, says the Tafsir al-Jalalain, a respected commentary on the Quran, and felt love for her, whereas Zaid disliked her. Zaid offered to divorce her so that Muhammad could marry her. Muhammad's response is recorded in an elliptical passage in the Quran. Keep thy wife to thyself and fear God. One would think that being overcome with desire for one's daughter-in-law would bring a blush to the cheeks of the most ardent proponent of free love. But the part of the story that embarrassed Muhammad, at least according to Islamic tradition, was not that at all. Rather, it was the fact that he told Zaid to keep his wife. Of this, one of his other wives, Aisha, later remarked, "If Allah's apostle were to conceal anything of the Quran, he would have concealed this verse." Why would Muhammad be embarrassed by this point? Because Allah wanted Muhammad to marry Zaynab, and therefore the Prophet was rejecting Allah's will. Indeed, Allah rebuked Muhammad for not wanting to receive what the deity wanted to give him, saying that the Prophet feared public opinion, as the people might justifiably be upset at Muhammad's new union with his comely former daughter-in-law, more than he feared Allah. And thou wast concealing within thyself what God should reveal, fearing other men, and God has better right for thee to fear him. Surah 33-37. So Muhammad resolved to do Allah's will. He went into the trance-like state that often attended his reception of divine revelations, and when he came to, he asked happily, "Who will go to Zaynab to tell her the good news, saying that God has married her to me?" Allah explained that he had staged the whole event in order to impress upon Muslims that adopted sons should not be treated as natural sons, and that adoption itself was illegitimate. God has not assigned to any man two hearts within his breast, nor has he made your wives, when you divorce, saying, "Be as my mother's back." Truly your mothers, neither has he made your adopted sons your sons, in fact. That is your own saying, the words of your mouths. But God speaks the truth and guides on the path. 33:4. And specifically in Muhammad's case, so when Zaid had accomplished what he would of her, then we gave her in marriage to thee, so that there should not be any fault in the believers touching the wives of their adopted sons, when they have accomplished what they would of them. 33-37. Zaid bin Muhammad went back to being known as Zaid bin Haritha, and to this day adoption is not considered legitimate in Islamic law. This new divine decree had the added benefit of absolving Muhammad of any guilt for violating the laws of consanguinity by marrying Zaynab, when according to a hadith in Bukhari's collection, Muhammad announced that Allah had married him to Zaynab. Aisha remarked, "With what degree of irony is up to the reader? I feel that your Lord hastens in fulfilling your wishes and desires." Could this story possibly have been fabricated as a pious legend? It is hard to imagine why any pious Muslim would have invented it. The Zaynab incident depicts Muhammad as a rogue prophet, enslaved to his lust and stooping to construct a flimsy excuse, the prohibition of adoption, in order to exonerate himself. But embarrassment is relative. We may see this incident as casting Muhammad in a bad light, but what constitutes a negative depiction is not necessarily constant from age to age, and culture to culture. Consider the story of Muhammad's marriage to Aisha, the daughter of his close companion and first successor, Abu Bakr, whereas the Quranic text that refers elliptically to Muhammad's marriage to Zaynab provides an elaborate explanation for the whole incident. The earliest records about Muhammad's dalliance with Aisha state events without apology. A hadith collected by Bukhari notes the Prophet wrote the marriage contract with Aisha while she was 6 years old and consummated his marriage with her while she was 9 years old, and she remained with him for 9 years, i.e. till his death. Aisha herself betrayed nervousness, but no one seemed particularly concerned. The Prophet engaged me when I was a girl of 6 years. We went to Medina and stayed at the home of Bani al-Harith bin Khazraj. Then I got ill and my hair fell down. Later on, my hair grew again, and my mother, Ruman, came to me while I was playing in a swing with some of my girlfriends. She called me and I went to her, not knowing what she wanted to do to me. She caught me by the hand and made me stand at the door of the house. I was breathless then, and when my breathing became all right, she took some water and rubbed my face and head with it. Then she took me into the house. There in the house I saw some Ansari women who said, "Best wishes and Allah's blessings and good luck." Then she entrusted me to them and they prepared me for the marriage. Unexpectedly, Allah's apostle came to me in the forenoon, and my mother handed me over to him, and at that time I was a girl of 9 years of age. End of quotation. The earliest Islamic sources offer no hint that anyone around Muhammad had a problem with this marriage. Bukhari reports matter-of-factly and more than once that she was 9 when the marriage was consummated. Nothing in the accounts of this marriage can compare with the evident embarrassment attending Muhammad's marriage to Zaynab. In fact, the Quran takes child marriage for granted in its directives about divorce. Other elements of Muhammad's career that jar modern sensibilities seem to have caused no embarrassment for the authors of the earliest Islamic texts. Far from recalling from their warrior prophet, one hadith has him boast, "I have been made victorious with terror." Another hadith tells of how Muhammad, enraged by a tribe that had murdered a shepherd and drove away his camels, had the culprits captured and ordered their eyes put out with heated pieces of iron and their hands and feet amputated. The latter punishment accords with the Quran's directive that the hands and feet of those who make war against Allah and His Messenger be amputated on opposite sides. Surah 5:33. Then he left the tribesmen in the desert without water. All this was justified according to a companion of Muhammad who is quoted in the hadith, because those people committed theft and murder, became infidels after embracing Islam, and fought against Allah and His Apostle. As brutal as this episode appears to modern eyes, to those who invented it, it demonstrated Muhammad's strength and fearlessness in the face of injustice. It also supported punishments that are still part of Islamic law, including amputation for theft, Quran 5:38, and the death penalty for apostasy, Surah 4:89. Similarly, hadiths portray Muhammad's polygamy as a sign not of libertinism but of his unmatched virility. The Prophet is reported as saying, "Gabriel brought a kettle from which I ate, and I was given the power of sexual intercourse equal to 40 men." Why the Zaynab story was composed. So, again from Robert Spencer. The story of Muhammad's marriage to his former daughter-in-law appears to betray embarrassment about and provide a justification for a negative episode in Muhammad's life. But it may actually be something quite else altogether. The Quran's elusive and fragmented reference to the incident concludes with the affirmation that Muhammad is not the father of any one of your men, but the messenger of God and the seal of the prophets. God has knowledge of everything, 33:40. What does that affirmation have to do with Muhammad's marriage to his daughter-in-law? Possibly nothing. but the Quran is remarkably decontextualized, varying from topic to topic within many of its surahs, often without any discernible logical connection between the subjects treated. Thus, the appearance of this affirmation of Muhammad as the seal of the prophets may have nothing to do with the Zaynab incident. Then again, when considered in light of a central tenet of Islamic theology, the assertion that Muhammad is the seal of the prophets appears to have everything to do with the story of his marriage to Zaynab. In the Quran, the prophets are all related to one another, and it appears that the prophetic office is handed down from father to son, like an inheritance or a genetic disposition. Speaking of Abraham, Allah says, "And we gave him Isaac and Jacob. Each one we guided, and Noah we guided before, and of his seed, David and Solomon, Job and Joseph, Moses and Aaron. Even so we recompense the good doers, Zechariah and John, Jesus and Elias. Each was of the righteous, Ishmael and Elisha, Jonah and Lot. Each one we preferred above all beings." Surah 6, 84-86. Thus David and Solomon, Job and Joseph, Moses and Aaron, and the rest were of his seed, that is, Abraham's. These prophets were all relatives, and presumably they received their prophetic spirit as something of an inheritance. This view is reinforced by the Quran's confusion of Miriam, the sister of Moses, and Aaron with Mary, the mother of Jesus. The name of each is the same in Arabic, Maryam. This makes Jesus Moses' nephew. While Islamic tradition has Muhammad saying that the appellation sister of Aaron for Mary in the Quran, 1928, was merely an honorific and not an expression of an actual blood relationship, the Quran also has Mary being born of the wife of Imran, the father of Moses. If therefore Muhammad had a son who survived into adulthood, he is said to have had as many as 5 sons, all of whom died before reaching puberty. The son would have been a prophet as well, and Muhammad would not have been the last prophet, the seal of the prophets. Cornell University professor David S. Powers, a scholar of Islamic history and law, has written an extraordinarily well-researched and well-reasoned book-length examination of the Zaynab incident and its historical and theological status. In it, Powers notes that, as the last prophet, Muhammad could not have a son who reached puberty. Otherwise, as Muqatil states, that son would have been a prophet. Muqatil ibn Sulaiman, who died in 767, was an early commentator on the Quran. Suddenly then, the presence of Muhammad's adopted son takes on an immense importance to Islamic theology. Powers explains, the logic of this argument applies not only to Muhammad's natural sons, none of whom reached puberty, but also to his adopted son Zaid, who did. By virtue of his status as Muhammad's adult son, Zaid bin Muhammad was a member of the Abrahamic family to which the mantle of prophecy had been entrusted as an exclusive possession. Similarly, Muhammad's grandson, Usama bin Zaid bin Muhammad, was also a member of this family. In theory, the mantle of prophecy might have passed from Muhammad to Zaid and from Zaid to Usama. Indeed, something very like this developed among the Shiites, who differed from the Sunnis in maintaining that the leader of the Islamic community had to be a member of Muhammad's household. I'm going to stop just for a second. Already we can see a strong motivation for this story, which is that the Umayyads may have wanted to push out the possibility among the Shiites of taking ownership of the caliphate. So this is a good blocking move. In the absence of a son, the authority fell to Ali ibn Abi Talib by virtue of his being Muhammad's son-in-law, the husband of his daughter Fatima. By that point, then, Zayd's claim to be Muhammad's son must have already been repudiated. Powers observes, the Muslim community had no choice but to construct its foundation narrative in such a way as to marginalize both Zayd and Usama. However, Muhammad's repudiation of Zayd did not fully eliminate the threat to the theological doctrine of the finality of prophecy. This is because at the time of Zayd's repudiation in 5 AH or AD 626, he was already a grown man. The fact that the Prophet had an adult son named Zayd bin Muhammad conflicted with the assertion in verse 40 that Muhammad is not the father of any of your men. For the sake of theological consistency, it was important to demonstrate that the man who had been Muhammad's son failed to outlive the Prophet. Just interrupt for a second. So it's a case of last man standing. If Muhammad can outlive him, he can still be considered the last prophet. So it all depends on who dies first. Back to the quotation. Like Muhammad's repudiation of Zayd, the death of the beloved of the Messenger of God sometime prior to the year 11 or 632 was a theological imperative. Sure enough, Islamic tradition holds that Zayd died in the Battle of Mu'tah in the year 629, 3 years before Muhammad himself, according to the Islamic tradition, of course. Thus, in order to ensure the centrality of Muhammad in Islamic tradition and to establish a religious orthodoxy that held the empire together, stories had to be invented, emphasizing that Muhammad had neither natural nor adopted sons. This was because a son of Muhammad could potentially become a rallying figure for a rival political faction, as Ali became for the Shiites. Even Aisha said, had Zayd outlived Muhammad, he would have appointed him as his successor. So Zayd had to die before Muhammad, and Usama had to be seen as having no reasonable claim to leadership. A delegitimization of adoption had the added benefit of striking at Islam's chief spiritual rival, Christianity, with its doctrine of Gentiles as adopted sons of God. To our 21st century Western sensibilities, then, the traditional account of Muhammad's marriage to the wife of his adopted son at first appears to construct a cover for that action by delegitimizing adoption, saying, as in Quran 33:4, that adopted sons are not to be considered actual sons, but a closer examination of the story, based on what we know of early Islamic history and theology, suggests that the pronouncements on adoption were not a convenient justification for Muhammad's marriage to Zaynab, but rather were the very point the story was meant to illustrate. In short, this incident no longer appears to be an embarrassment that Muslims felt compelled to explain away. It seems fundamental to Islam's theological claims. This explanation has an advantage over the canonical Islamic account in that it does what the mainstream version does not and cannot do. It explains how Quran 33:40, which affirms that Muhammad is not the father of any of the Muslims, but rather is the seal of the prophets, relates to the story of Zaynab, even in the fragmentary form in which it is told in the Quran. This exposition raises other questions, however. Although it explains why the Zaynab story may have been invented to serve various theological and political imperatives, it seems to take for granted that Zayd himself was a historical figure known in the early Muslim community, and that he was known to have been Muhammad's adopted son. It apparently assumes that Zayd and his son Usama had been known and were remembered, and that their existence, or at least their non-prophetic status, had to be explained. In other words, the story of Zaynab may not have been constructed to explain away Muhammad's lechery, but if it was constructed to dismiss Zayd or Usama's claims to succeed the Prophet, this suggests that the story deals with real historical figures, not myths. And if Usama and Zayd were real, wouldn't Muhammad be also? Is it possible that the mysterious Arab prophet, who appears in the earliest documents of the Arab conquest, apparently preaching some form of monotheism and kingship with the Jews and Christians, was indeed Muhammad? At the very least, the figure of Usama must be considered in this context. Zayd may have conveniently died before Muhammad did, but Usama did not. Usama shows up in several hadiths. For example, Islamic tradition indicates that in the last year of his life, Muhammad appointed Usama as commander of an expedition to Syria. This was an unpopular choice among the Muslims, goes the story. But Muhammad defended Usama. "I have been informed that you spoke about Usama. Let it be known that he is the most beloved of all people to me." Abu Bakr, Muhammad's successor, later sends Usama on a raid, from which he returned with captives and booty. All this, however, depends on the hadith, which, as we have seen, were subject to rampant forgery for political reasons. There is no contemporary indication that Zayd or Usama existed at all. Given the theological imperative to establish Muhammad as the final prophet, there would have been ample reason to invent them. If Zayd and Usama did exist, most of what we know about them appears to be legend that was attached to shadowy historical personages whose actual deeds have been largely forgotten. Giving Muhammad a son whom he adopted and then repudiated decades later, in obedience to divine revelation, reinforced the Quran's point that one should obey not human beings but Allah alone, Surah 33-37. Having Usama appear in the early Muslim community, but not as a contender for the leadership, reinforced the point that Muhammad had no sons of any kind, and thus the prophetic line ended with his death. Thank you for watching.